I thought the worst moment of my life was watching my husband take his last breath in that sterile hospital room 5 years ago. I was wrong. The worst moment was standing alone at that bus stop on December 15th, rain turning to sleet, watching my son's SUV disappear into the night without even a brake light flashing red in hesitation. My name is Esther Rivera, and I'm about to tell you how one phone call changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You know that moment when you realize the people you'd die for wouldn't even slow down to help you live? That realization hit me like the icy wind whipping through that deserted bus stop at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. I was 68 years old, wearing a thin cardigan that offered about as much protection as tissue paper, clutching my purse and wondering how my own flesh and blood could leave me stranded like a discarded piece of furniture. The evening had started so differently. My son Jason had called that morning, his voice warm with what I thought was genuine affection. "Mom, Rebecca's been asking when you're coming to see the new house. Why don't you come for dinner tonight? The kids have been wanting to show you their rooms." Rebecca was his wife of 12 years, mother to my 2 precious grandchildren, Emma and Tyler. At 10 and 8 years old respectively, they were the light of my world, the reason I endured Rebecca's passive-aggressive comments and Jason's increasingly distant behavior since their father's death. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing for this visit. Not just getting ready, but emotionally preparing myself for what had become a delicate dance of trying to be the loving grandmother and mother without overstepping invisible boundaries that seemed to shift without warning. I chose my outfit carefully, the navy blue dress that Rebecca had once complimented, hoping to start the evening on a positive note. I even stopped by the bakery to pick up those expensive cupcakes that Emma loved, the ones with the elaborate frosting flowers that cost more than I typically spent on groceries for 3 days. The bus ride to their neighborhood took 45 minutes, winding through parts of the city that had gentrified beyond recognition since I'd raised my children there. Jason and Rebecca lived in Willowbrook Estates, a development that screamed success with its manicured lawns and 3-car garages. Every house looked like it belonged in a magazine, including theirs. A sprawling colonial with cream-colored shutters and professionally maintained landscaping that probably cost more monthly than my entire Social Security check. When I arrived at 6:30, Emma and Tyler bounded to the door with enthusiasm that warmed my heart. "Grandma Esther, you brought cupcakes!" Tyler exclaimed, his gap-toothed grin infectious. Emma, more reserved like her mother but still genuinely excited, hugged my waist and told me about the science project she'd been working on. These moments, these pure interactions with my grandchildren, were what sustained me through the lonelier aspects of widowhood. Rebecca greeted me with her trademark smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes but looked perfect to anyone watching. "Esther, you look lovely. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready." She was impeccably dressed, even for a casual family dinner, her blonde hair styled in those loose waves that looked effortless but probably took an hour to achieve. Rebecca worked in marketing for a tech company, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who was accustomed to being the smartest person in most rooms. Jason emerged from his home office, still in his business casual attire from his job as a financial advisor. At 35, he'd inherited his father's height and my stubborn streak, though lately, the stubbornness seemed directed primarily at maintaining distance from me. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me a brief hug that felt more obligatory than affectionate. "How was the bus ride?" The question should have been innocent, but there was something in his tone, a subtle emphasis on the word bus that made me feel defensive. "Fine, sweetheart. You know I don't mind public transportation." What I didn't add was that I didn't mind it because I had no choice. The car had been sold 2 years ago when the maintenance costs became impossible to manage on my fixed income. Dinner itself was pleasant on the surface. Rebecca had prepared herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, the kind of meal that belonged on a cooking show. We ate in their formal dining room, surrounded by furniture that I'd helped them pick out when they'd first bought the house. The children chattered about school, their friends, their upcoming Christmas wishes. I listened with the fierce attention of someone who knew these conversations were precious and finite. But underneath the surface pleasantries, I felt the familiar undercurrent of tension. Rebecca's comments were measured and polite, but they carried weight. Esther, you really should consider getting one of those medical alert devices. Living alone at your age, anything could happen. Jason nodded in agreement, adding, We worry about you, Mom. That neighborhood isn't what it used to be. They were talking about my safety, but what I heard was judgment about my choices, my circumstances, my inability to maintain the middle-class lifestyle that my husband's death had stripped away. The house I'd raised Jason in, the one where he'd learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway and built snow forts in the backyard, was now dismissed as unsafe simply because property values had declined and the demographic had shifted. After dinner, while Rebecca supervised the children's homework and Jason returned to his office to handle what he called urgent client issues, I found myself washing dishes alone in their gleaming kitchen. It wasn't that they'd ask me to clean up, but the alternative was sitting alone in their living room, feeling like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. At least washing dishes gave me something productive to do while I listened to the sounds of their family life continuing around me. Around 9 o'clock, Rebecca announced that it was time for the children's baths and bedtime routine. Emma and Tyler hugged me goodbye with the sweet reluctance of children who genuinely enjoyed their grandmother's company. "When are you coming back, Grandma?" Emma asked, and before I could answer, Rebecca interjected smoothly. "We'll have to see what works with everyone's schedule, sweetheart." That's when Jason appeared with my coat and purse, the universal signal that the evening was concluding. "Let me drive you to the bus stop, Mom," he said, already reaching for his keys. Not "let me drive you home," which would have been the natural offer from a son to his elderly mother on a cold December night. Just to the bus stop, like I was a casual acquaintance who needed directions to public transportation. The drive to the bus stop took less than 5 minutes, filled with small talk about the weather and Jason's work. Rebecca had remained at the house, citing the need to oversee bedtime routines, which I understood. What I didn't understand was the haste with which Jason seemed eager to complete this transportation duty. He pulled up to the bus stop, a small covered shelter that looked forlorn under the flickering streetlight. "The next bus should be here in about 15 minutes, he said, consulting his phone. "You'll be home by 11:30. He leaned over to give me a quick peck on the cheek, the kind of perfunctory gesture that families make without thinking. "Thanks for coming tonight, Mom. The kids always love seeing you." I gathered my purse and the small bag of leftovers Rebecca had insisted I take, though I suspected it was more about clearing space in their refrigerator than ensuring my nutritional needs were met. "Drive safely, sweetheart," I said, stepping out into the cold air that immediately cut through my cardigan. "Tell Rebecca thank you again for the lovely dinner." Jason waved as he pulled away, his taillights disappearing around the corner with an efficiency that suggested he had more important places to be. I settled onto the cold metal bench inside the bus shelter, checking my phone for the time. 11:08. The next bus was scheduled for 11:23, well within the time frame Jason had calculated. But as I sat there, watching the occasional car pass by on the increasingly empty street, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The electronic display board at the bus stop, which I hadn't paid attention to when Jason dropped me off, was flashing a message in red letters. "Service suspended due to weather conditions. Next available bus. 6 a.m. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and what had been a light rain during dinner was now turning into freezing precipitation that stung my face and made the bus shelter feel like a wind tunnel. I fumbled for my phone with fingers that were already growing numb, dialing Jason's number with the desperate hope that he hadn't yet reached home. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. His voice, recorded during a time when he'd still answered my calls promptly, cheerfully informed me that he was unavailable, but would return my call as soon as possible. "Jason, honey, it's Mom," I said after the beep, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "The buses aren't running tonight because of the weather. Could you please come back and get me?" "I'm still at the bus stop." I waited 10 minutes before calling again, then another 10 minutes before trying a third time. Each call went straight to voicemail, each message growing slightly more urgent as the reality of my situation became undeniable. My son, who I'd raised with values of kindness and responsibility, who I'd taught to always help those in need, was either ignoring my calls or had turned off his phone entirely. By midnight, I was shivering uncontrollably. The bus shelter provided minimal protection from the wind, and my thin cardigan was soaked through. My feet in the low-heeled pumps I'd chosen to look nice for dinner were losing sensation. I tried calling Rebecca's phone, hoping she might answer even if Jason wouldn't, but that call also went to voicemail. The street was virtually deserted now, with only the occasional car passing by, their drivers probably warm and comfortable, heading home to loving families who wouldn't abandon them at bus stops in freezing rain.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
I considered trying to walk, but I was at least 3 miles from home through neighborhoods I didn't know well, in weather that was becoming genuinely dangerous for someone my age. That's when I made the call that would change everything. Not to Jason, not to Rebecca, not to any family member who should have been my first line of defense in an emergency. I called my nephew Marcus, my late sister's son, who lived 40 minutes away, but had always maintained the kind of genuine relationship with me that my own son seemed incapable of sustaining. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep but immediately alert when he heard my distress. "Aunt Esther, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Through chattering teeth, I explained my situation. Marcus's response was immediate and furious. "Are you telling me that Jason left you at a bus stop in this weather? At midnight? Stay right where you are, Aunt Esther. I'm coming to get you right now." While I waited for Marcus, huddled in that inadequate shelter, with freezing rain turning the night into a nightmare, something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman who had always made excuses for her son's increasingly selfish behavior, who had convinced herself that his distance was just the natural evolution of adult children establishing independence, finally saw the situation with crystal clarity. This wasn't about independence or busy schedules or the challenges of balancing family obligations. This was about basic human decency, about the fundamental responsibility we have to care for those who once cared for us. Jason had looked at his elderly mother, calculated the inconvenience of ensuring her safe passage home, and decided that inconvenience was more important than my safety or dignity. Marcus arrived 38 minutes later, his pickup truck cutting through the freezing rain like a beacon of hope. He jumped out without regard for his own comfort, helping me into the passenger seat and wrapping me in a heavy blanket he'd brought from home. "I can't believe he did this to you," Marcus said, his voice tight with anger as he adjusted the heater to full blast. "This is unforgivable, Aunt Esther." During the drive to my apartment, as feeling gradually returned to my extremities and my core body temperature began to normalize, Marcus asked questions that no one in my immediate family had bothered to ask in years. How was I managing financially? Was I eating properly? Did I need help with anything around the apartment? When was the last time I'd seen a doctor? His genuine concern highlighted just how absent that kind of care had been from my relationship with Jason and Rebecca. They asked perfunctory questions about my health and safety, but they were the kind of questions people ask when they want to appear caring, without actually taking responsibility for the answers. "Marcus," I said as we pulled up to my apartment building, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, Aunt Esther. Anything." "Do you think I've been fooling myself about Jason? About how much he actually cares about me versus how much he feels obligated to tolerate me?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel as the engine idled. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle, but unflinching. "Aunt Esther, I think Jason lost sight of who you are somewhere along the way. I think he sees you as a burden instead of recognizing everything you sacrificed to give him the foundation that allowed him to build his successful life." That night, lying in my own bed with extra blankets and a cup of hot tea that Marcus had insisted on making before he left, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. I was done being the accommodating mother who absorbed disrespect in exchange for scraps of attention from my son and his family. I was done pretending that their treatment of me was acceptable because they occasionally included me in family dinners or remembered to call on holidays. The next morning, I began making phone calls. But not to Jason to express my hurt or disappointment. Not to Rebecca to try to smooth over the situation with diplomacy and understanding. My first call was to my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Hernandez who had handled my husband's estate and had become something of a friend over the years. "Patricia," I said when she answered, "I need to discuss some financial arrangements, and I need your advice on protecting my interests." What Jason and Rebecca didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask about or investigate, despite their frequent comments about my financial situation, was that I wasn't the struggling widow they assumed me to be. Yes, I lived modestly. Yes, I took public transportation and shopped carefully, and lived in an apartment instead of maintaining the family home. But those choices weren't driven by poverty. They were driven by wisdom. My husband had been an excellent provider and a careful planner. The life insurance policy, the pension, the investments we'd accumulated over 43 years of marriage had left me financially secure. Not wealthy, but certainly comfortable enough to live with dignity and independence. I'd chosen to live below my means, not because I had to, but because I wanted to preserve resources for genuine emergencies, and, if I'm being honest, to leave something meaningful to my children and grandchildren. More importantly, in the years since my husband's death, I'd made my own financial decisions with the same careful consideration he'd taught me. I'd invested wisely, saved consistently, and built a portfolio that would have surprised anyone who assumed that a widow living in a modest apartment was automatically struggling financially. But the most significant thing that Jason and Rebecca didn't know was how deeply involved I'd become in their own financial success. When they'd bought their house in Willowbrook Estates, they'd struggled to come up with the 20% down payment required to avoid private mortgage insurance. Jason had been too proud to ask for help directly, but he'd mentioned their challenges during one of our phone conversations. Without fanfare or expectation of recognition, I'd quietly provided the $60,000 they needed. Not as a loan with formal paperwork and repayment schedules, but as a gift from a mother who wanted to help her son achieve his dreams. I'd structured it through Patricia's office to look like a small inheritance from a distant relative, allowing Jason to accept the help without feeling diminished by charity from his mother. Similarly, when Rebecca had wanted to start her own consulting business 3 years earlier but needed startup capital, I'd again provided funding. $25,000 transferred through a complicated arrangement that made it appear to come from a business development grant she'd applied for. Rebecca's success in building her client base and eventually landing her current high-paying corporate position had been built on a foundation that I'd provided. Even more recently, when Jason had been considering a career change that would have required additional certification and a temporary reduction in income, I'd ensured that their children's education funds were supplemented to cover any gaps. Emma's piano lessons, Tyler's soccer league fees, the family vacation to Disney World last summer, all had been partially subsidized by careful financial gifts that I'd designed to be invisible to their pride, but essential to their comfort. In total, over the past 5 years, I'd quietly invested nearly $150,000 in my son's family success and happiness. Not because they'd asked, and certainly not because they'd acknowledged my contributions, but because I'd believed that supporting their dreams was more important than maintaining a lavish lifestyle for myself. But now, sitting in Patricia's office the morning after being abandoned at that bus stop, I was seeing these financial gifts through a completely different lens. Jason and Rebecca had built their comfortable life partly on my generosity, then treated me like a inconvenient charity case whose presence in their lives was something to be managed and minimized. "Patricia," I said, spreading the financial documents across her desk, "I want to understand my options for recovering these funds." Patricia studied the paperwork with the focused attention of someone who understood that this wasn't just about money, but about justice and self-respect. "Esther, most of these transactions were structured as gifts for tax purposes. Recovering them directly would be legally complicated." "I'm not necessarily interested in recovering them," I said carefully, "but I am interested in ensuring that future financial support is contingent on being treated with basic respect and consideration." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's much more straightforward. We can absolutely restructure your estate planning and any ongoing financial arrangements to reflect your current priorities." Over the next 2 hours, we developed a comprehensive plan that would protect my interests, while sending a clear message about the consequences of taking my generosity for granted. The centerpiece of this plan was elegant in its simplicity. Jason and Rebecca had become accustomed to certain financial cushions that appeared to be independent of me, but were actually dependent on my continued goodwill. The business account that Rebecca used for her consulting work, which she believed was funded by that mysterious business development grant, was actually a trust that I controlled. The education fund for Emma and Tyler that supplemented their college savings was similarly under my discretion. Most significantly, the investment account that Jason had been told was a bonus from his employer's profit-sharing program was actually a monthly transfer that I authorized. With a few strategic phone calls and some revised legal documents, I could effectively freeze these financial streams without violating any laws or breaking any explicit agreements. Jason and Rebecca would suddenly find themselves facing the true cost of their lifestyle without subsidies they'd never known they were receiving. But I wanted to do more than just withdraw my financial support. I wanted them to understand exactly why their comfortable life was becoming less comfortable, and I wanted that understanding to come with an opportunity for redemption that would require genuine change in how they treated me. Patricia helped me craft a plan that was both fair and educational. Rather than simply cutting off support with no explanation, I would give Jason and Rebecca a choice. They could continue receiving the financial benefits they'd grown accustomed to, but only if they demonstrated real commitment to treating me as a valued family member rather than an obligation to be managed. The terms were simple but non-negotiable. First, they would visit me at my apartment at least twice a month, not as brief courtesy calls, but as genuine family time where we could develop the kind of relationship that grandparents and grandchildren deserve. Second, they would include me in family decisions that affected my grandchildren's lives, recognizing that my experience and wisdom might actually be valuable rather than irrelevant. Finally, they would acknowledge the financial support I'd provided over the years, and work with me to determine how that support should continue in ways that honored both their independence and my dignity. If they could meet these terms for 6 months, demonstrating that their changed behavior was genuine rather than temporary compliance motivated by financial pressure, the support would continue permanently. If they couldn't or wouldn't meet these terms, the financial arrangements would end permanently, but without any demand for repayment of past gifts. This gives them agency, Patricia observed as we finalized the documents. They get to choose whether your relationship is worth more to them than their pride. 3 days after being abandoned at that bus stop, I was ready to make the phone call that would change everything. They settled onto my couch with the resigned expressions of adult children preparing to handle an elderly parent's confusion or need for assistance. "Thank you both for coming," I began, taking my seat in the armchair across from them. "I asked you here because Tuesday night made me realize that we need to have some honest conversations about our family relationships and some financial arrangements that you may not be fully aware of." Rebecca and Jason exchanged glances, the kind of silent communication that married couples develop over years together. I could see them preparing to handle whatever crisis they assumed I was about to present. "First," I continued, "I want to talk about what happened Tuesday night. Jason, you left me at a bus stop in freezing rain without confirming that transportation was actually available. When I called for help, you didn't answer your phone. I spent over an hour in dangerous weather conditions because my own son decided that his convenience was more important than my safety." Jason's face flushed, but before he could interrupt, I held up my hand. "I'm not looking for apologies or explanations right now. I'm explaining why I've made some decisions about how our family operates going forward." Rebecca leaned forward slightly, her marketing instincts probably sensing that this conversation was heading in an unexpected direction. "Esther, we understand that Tuesday was unfortunate, but..." "Rebecca, please let me finish." My voice carried an authority that surprised all three of us. "What I realized Tuesday night is that you both treat me like a burden rather than a family member. You include me in your lives when it's convenient, and dismiss me when it's not. That treatment is no longer acceptable to me." Jason found his voice. "Mom, that's not fair. We invite you for dinner. We call you regularly. You manage me, Jason. You don't have a relationship with me. And more importantly, you've built your comfortable lifestyle on financial support that I've provided without your knowledge or acknowledgement." The silence that followed was profound. I could see the confusion on their faces as they tried to process what I might mean. I opened the folder Patricia had prepared for me, spreading documents across my coffee table. "Jason, do you remember struggling to come up with the down payment for your house?" "Yes, but we managed to make it work with that inheritance from Rebecca's great aunt." "Rebecca doesn't have a great aunt with money, Jason. That $60,000 came from me." Rebecca's face went pale. "That's impossible." The money came through a law firm in Chicago. My law firm arranged to preserve your dignity while ensuring you could buy your dream home. I continued methodically through the list. Rebecca's business startup costs, the children's education fund supplements, Jason's professional development account, the vacation funds, the emergency cushions that had made their financial lives comfortable and secure. Over the past 5 years, I concluded, I've invested nearly $150,000 in your family's success. Money that came from careful planning and the resources your father and I built together. Jason was staring at the documents as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. Why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted you to succeed on your own merits and because I believed that supporting your dreams was more important than receiving credit for that support. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. Are you saying that our business account, Tyler's soccer fees, Emma's piano lessons, all partially funded by me, yes, and all dependent on my continued goodwill? The weight of this revelation settled over them like a heavy blanket. Their comfortable life, their financial security, their ability to provide for their children without stress, all of it was built on a foundation they'd never acknowledged or appreciated. What do you want from us? Jason asked, his voice small and uncertain. I want to be treated like a valued family member, instead of an inconvenient obligation. I want my grandchildren to actually know me, not just see me at carefully managed dinner visits. I want to be included in family decisions and treated with the respect that my contributions to this family have earned. I explained the terms Patricia and I had developed. Regular visits that prioritized genuine relationship building, inclusion in family planning and decision-making, acknowledgement of my financial contributions and collaborative discussions about how that support should continue. If you can demonstrate genuine change in how you treat me over the next 6 months, these financial arrangements will continue permanently. If you can't or won't make those changes, the support ends. But you won't owe me anything for what I've already given. Rebecca was crying quietly, whether from shame or fear or genuine remorse, I couldn't tell. Jason sat in stunned silence, processing the fact that his independent adult life had been far less independent than he'd believed. We never knew, he finally said. Mom, if we'd known you were helping us financially, you would have what, Jason? Treated me better? Been more grateful? The money should have been irrelevant to how you treat your mother. The conversation continued for another hour, with questions and clarifications and the beginning of what I hoped might be genuine understanding. They asked about my financial situation, finally showing the kind of interest in my well-being that should have been natural years earlier. They apologized for Tuesday night, but more importantly, they began to acknowledge the pattern of behavior that had made Tuesday night possible. When they finally left, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the sense that I'd advocated for myself effectively and with dignity. Whether Jason and Rebecca would choose to meet my terms remained to be seen, but for the first time since my husband's death, I felt like I had some control over my own life and relationships. The following weeks would test whether my son valued our relationship enough to change his behavior, or whether he would choose to sacrifice family connection rather than acknowledge that his elderly mother deserved better treatment than he'd been providing. Either way, I would no longer be the woman who accepted being abandoned at bus stops in freezing rain, as the price of maintaining a relationship with people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The power dynamic in my family had shifted permanently, and I was finally the one holding the cards that mattered most. The morning after my confrontation with Jason and Rebecca, I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, anticipation mixed with genuine peace. For the first time since my husband's death, I'd taken control of a situation instead of simply enduring it. The woman who had spent 5 years walking on eggshells around her own son's family was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved. I made my coffee slowly, savoring the ritual in my quiet kitchen where no one dismissed my presence or made me feel like an unwelcome guest. The apartment that Jason and Rebecca had subtly criticized as inadequate now felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could think clearly without the constant pressure of trying to be the perfect, undemanding mother and grandmother. My phone rang at 8:30, interrupting my peaceful morning reflection. The caller ID showed Rebecca's name, and I let it ring 3 times before answering, a small assertion of control that felt surprisingly empowering. Esther? Rebecca's voice was strained, lacking its usual polished confidence. I haven't been able to sleep since yesterday. Could we talk? I mean, really talk, not just the surface conversations we usually have. The request surprised me. In 12 years of knowing Rebecca, she'd never initiated a genuine personal conversation with me. Our interactions had always been carefully managed exchanges focused on logistics and pleasantries, never venturing into emotional territory that might require vulnerability or authentic connection. Of course, Rebecca, would you like to come here, or would you prefer to meet somewhere else? Could I come to your apartment? I'd like to see how you live, understand your life better. I realize I've never really paid attention to your world, only expected you to fit into ours. An hour later, Rebecca stood in my living room, looking around with what appeared to be genuine curiosity, rather than the polite interest she'd shown during her few previous visits. She studied the photographs on my mantel, the books filling my shelves, the comfortable furniture that prioritized function over style. For the first time, she seemed to be seeing me as a person with preferences and history, rather than just Jason's elderly mother. Your apartment is lovely, she said, settling into my reading chair. It feels like you, peaceful and thoughtful. I don't think I've ever asked you how you chose this place or what you like about living here. I joined her in the living room, sitting on the couch where Jason and I had had our difficult conversation the day before. After your father-in-law died, I looked at dozens of places. This one felt right because it has good natural light, and it's close to the library where I volunteer. The neighborhood is quiet, but not isolated. Rebecca nodded, then took a deep breath that suggested she was preparing to venture into uncomfortable territory. Esther, I need to be honest with you about something that's been bothering me for years. I've treated you badly, and yesterday made me realize just how badly. The admission hung in the air between us. I waited, curious to see if Rebecca would actually follow through with genuine self-reflection, or if this was another carefully managed conversation designed to achieve a specific outcome. When Jason and I first got married, I was intimidated by you, she continued. You'd raised this wonderful man who clearly adored you, and I was afraid I'd never measure up to the relationship you two had. Instead of trying to build my own relationship with you, I decided it was easier to keep you at arm's length. This was not what I'd expected. In all my years of trying to understand Rebecca's coolness toward me, I'd never considered that it might stem from insecurity, rather than dislike or indifference. As the years went on, Rebecca continued, that distance became a habit. I told myself we just didn't have much in common, that you were from a different generation with different values. But really, I was protecting myself from having to be vulnerable with you, from risking that you might not approve of me or that I might not be good enough for your son. I studied Rebecca's face, looking for signs that this was a performance designed to manipulate me into softening my position. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before, genuine remorse and what appeared to be authentic self-awareness. Rebecca, I never wanted to compete with you for Jason's affection. I wanted to welcome you into our family and help you feel supported, not threatened. I know that now, she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. But at the time, everything you did felt like a reminder of how much I didn't know about being a wife and mother. When you'd suggest different ways to handle the children's problems or share stories about Jason's childhood, I heard criticism instead of wisdom. We talked for over 2 hours, and for the first time since I'd known her, Rebecca dropped the polished facade that she presented to the world. She talked about her own mother, who had died when Rebecca was in college, and how she'd struggled to navigate marriage and motherhood without maternal guidance. She admitted that she'd often felt like she was making up the rules as she went along, and that my presence reminded her of her own sense of inadequacy. The money revelation yesterday was shocking, Rebecca said, but what really devastated me was realizing how we've wasted 12 years of potential relationship with you. Emma and Tyler could have had a grandmother who was truly involved in their lives instead of someone we trotted out for holiday performances. I found myself genuinely moved by Rebecca's honesty. This wasn't the surface-level apology I'd expected, but a real reckoning with years of missed opportunities and misunderstood intentions. Rebecca, I appreciate your honesty more than you know, but I need you to understand that changing this dynamic will require more than good intentions. It will require consistent actions over time. I know, she said firmly, and I want to start immediately. Not because of the money, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't a factor, but because I want Emma and Tyler to really know their grandmother. I want them to benefit from your wisdom and experience, instead of seeing you as just another adult they have to be polite to. Before Rebecca left, we made concrete plans for the following week. She would bring the children to my apartment on Saturday afternoon, not for a brief courtesy visit, but for an actual activity where we could work on a project together. Emma had mentioned wanting to learn to knit, and Tyler was fascinated by old photographs, so we planned an afternoon where I could teach Emma basic stitches while sharing family photo albums with Tyler. One more thing, Rebecca said as she prepared to leave. I want to understand your financial situation better. Not so we can take advantage, but so I can make sure we're not inadvertently creating hardship for you. Yesterday, I realized I've never even asked if you need help with anything. The question touched on something I'd been thinking about since our confrontation. My financial independence had been both a source of pride and a burden. Pride because I'd managed my resources carefully and maintained my autonomy. A burden because that independence had allowed my family to ignore whether I might need support or assistance in other ways. I'm financially stable, Rebecca, but there are other kinds of support that would be meaningful to me. Sometimes I could use help with heavy lifting or reaching high places. Sometimes I'd like company for medical appointments or errands. Mostly, I'd like to feel like my family knows me well enough to anticipate what I might need, instead of assuming I'm completely self-sufficient. After Rebecca left, I called Marcus to update him on this unexpected development. He listened carefully as I described the conversation, then offered his characteristic blend of support and caution. Aunt Esther, I'm glad Rebecca is showing some self-awareness, but remember that people can be very sincere when they're facing consequences for their behavior. The real test will be whether she maintains this attitude when the immediate crisis passes. Marcus was right, of course. Rebecca's emotional honesty could be genuine, while still being motivated primarily by the desire to maintain their financial security. But I'd structured my ultimatum specifically to address this possibility. 6 months of consistent behavior change would demonstrate whether their new treatment of me was sustainable or just temporary compliance. 3 days later, Jason called to request a private conversation. Unlike Rebecca's emotional vulnerability, Jason's approach was more analytical, befitting his career in financial planning. He wanted to understand the practical implications of my decision and explore what he called sustainable solutions for ongoing family dynamics. When he arrived at my apartment that evening, he carried a leather portfolio that I recognized from his professional meetings. The sight of it initially irritated me, suggesting that he was approaching our family relationship like a business problem to be solved through proper planning and documentation. Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation nonstop, he began, settling into the chair Rebecca had occupied earlier. I keep trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would leave his mother stranded in bad weather. This was a more promising start than I'd expected. Instead of focusing immediately on the financial arrangements or negotiating the terms I'd presented, Jason seemed genuinely troubled by his own behavior. I think I know when it started, he continued. After Dad died, you seemed so strong, so capable of handling everything on your own. You never asked for help, never complained about being lonely or struggling. I convinced myself that you preferred independence to involvement from me. I recognized the rationalization immediately. It was easier for Jason to believe that I preferred solitude than to acknowledge that he'd gradually withdrawn from my life as his own responsibilities and interests expanded. Jason, there's a difference between not wanting to burden your children and not wanting relationships with them. I never asked for help because I didn't want to be seen as needy or demanding, but that didn't mean I didn't want your company or emotional support. I see that now, he said, and I could hear genuine regret in his voice. But Mom, I also need you to understand something. The way you handled your finances, keeping your support of us secret, it made me feel like you didn't trust me to handle the knowledge responsibly. This perspective surprised me. I had structured my financial gifts to preserve Jason's pride and sense of independence. It hadn't occurred to me that the secrecy itself might be perceived as condescending or manipulative. I wanted you to feel successful on your own merits, I explained. I was afraid that if you knew the money came from me, it would undermine your confidence or make you feel dependent. But Mom, it also meant that I never had the opportunity to express gratitude or to make informed decisions about accepting your help. You took away my agency to choose whether I wanted financial assistance from you. The conversation continued for over an hour, with both of us exploring how our good intentions had created unintended consequences. Jason's withdrawal from my life had been partially motivated by his assumption that I preferred minimal involvement. My secretive financial support had been intended to preserve his dignity, but had actually prevented honest communication about our family's financial dynamics. Going forward, Jason said, I want complete transparency about any financial arrangements. If you choose to continue supporting us, I want to know about it so I can express appropriate gratitude and make sure we're not taking advantage of your generosity. This was exactly the kind of mature response I'd hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect. Jason was taking responsibility for his behavior, while also establishing boundaries that would make our future interactions more honest and equitable. I also want to talk about the practical aspects of being more involved in your life, Jason continued, opening his portfolio. Rebecca and I discussed this extensively, and we want to create a structure that ensures regular contact and support without it feeling forced or artificial. He showed me a calendar he'd prepared, blocking out specific times each week for family activities that would include me meaningfully rather than peripherally. Saturday mornings for breakfast at my apartment or theirs, alternating weekly. Wednesday evenings for helping with homework or school projects where my experience might be valuable. One weekend afternoon each month dedicated to activities I chose, whether that was visiting museums, attending cultural events, or simply spending time together without specific agenda. We also want to establish some practical support systems, Jason added. I want to be your emergency contact for medical appointments. I want to help you with maintenance issues in your apartment. I want to know if you need transportation or assistance with errands. The offer was comprehensive and thoughtful, addressing both the emotional and practical aspects of building a genuine relationship. But I found myself hesitating, wondering if this sudden attention was sustainable, or if it would gradually fade as the financial pressure lessened. Jason, I appreciate the planning, but I'm concerned that you're approaching this like a business problem with scheduled solutions. Relationships can't be maintained through calendars and task lists alone. You're right, Mom, but I also know that without some structure, it will be too easy to fall back into old patterns, where good intentions don't translate into consistent actions. Think of this as a framework, not a rigid system. We spent another hour refining the arrangements, and I found myself cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. Jason's analytical approach, which had initially seemed cold, actually demonstrated serious commitment to change. He wasn't just promising to do better. He was creating systems to ensure that better became sustainable. The following Saturday brought the first test of these new dynamics. Rebecca arrived with Emma and Tyler as planned, but instead of the brief, polite visit I'd grown accustomed to, she settled in for an actual afternoon of activities. Emma was genuinely excited about learning to knit, and Tyler's fascination with family photographs provided a natural opportunity for storytelling that went far beyond surface-level interaction. Grandma Esther, who is this? Tyler asked, pointing to a photograph of his grandfather as a young man, working on a construction project. That's your grandfather when he was about your father's age now, I explained. He was building the elementary school where your father learned to read. Emma looked up from the knitting needles she was struggling to manage. Daddy went to school in a building that Grandpa built? He did. Your grandfather was very proud that his work became part of your father's education. These simple exchanges, multiplied over the course of the afternoon, created the kind of generational connection that had been missing from our family for years. The children weren't just being polite to their grandmother. They were discovering family history and developing genuine curiosity about their heritage. Rebecca participated actively in these conversations, asking questions about family traditions and stories that she'd never shown interest in before. More importantly, she seemed genuinely present, rather than managing the interaction or watching the clock for an appropriate departure time. Mom Rivera, Tyler said toward the end of the afternoon, using the more formal address that had always created distance between us. Could you teach me to make those cookies you brought to our house that one time? The question was simple, but it represented something profound. Tyler was expressing genuine interest in learning something from me, in creating a shared activity that would require multiple interactions and ongoing relationship. Of course, sweetheart, but if I'm going to teach you to bake, you should probably call me Grandma instead of Mom Rivera. We're family, not formal acquaintances. Tyler grinned and threw his arms around me with the spontaneous affection that had been missing from our interactions for far too long. Okay, Grandma, when can we make cookies? Before Rebecca and the children left, we scheduled specific times for the baking lesson and continued knitting instruction. But more importantly, the interactions felt natural rather than forced, suggesting that the structure Jason had proposed might actually support genuine relationship development rather than replacing it. That evening, I called Patricia to update her on these developments and to discuss whether any modifications to our financial arrangements might be appropriate given the positive changes I was observing. Esther, it's encouraging that they're responding positively, but remember that you set a 6-month timeline for a reason. Real change takes time to become permanent. Don't let early enthusiasm convince you to abandon the boundaries you've established. Patricia was right. The weekend had been promising, but one successful visit didn't constitute the sustained behavior change that would justify resuming full financial support. I needed to maintain my position while remaining open to genuine progress. Over the following weeks, Jason and Rebecca maintained their new patterns of interaction with remarkable consistency. The Wednesday evening homework help sessions became a highlight of my week, giving me opportunities to work directly with Emma and Tyler on projects where my experience was actually valuable. Emma's struggles with a history report about family immigration stories led to fascinating conversations about her great-grandparents' journey from Puerto Rico. Tyler's science project about simple machines allowed me to share stories about his grandfather's construction work and the tools he'd used. These interactions felt different from our previous family time because they were purposeful rather than obligatory. Instead of sitting politely while the children performed their achievements for me, I was actively contributing to their learning and development. Instead of being a passive observer of their lives, I was becoming a genuine participant. The Saturday morning breakfasts evolved into occasions where we could address family business without the artificial separation between adult concerns and children's interests. Emma and Tyler participated in discussions about summer vacation planning, holiday traditions, and family decision-making in ways that honored their perspectives while including me in the process. 1 month into our new arrangement, Rebecca surprised me with a conversation that revealed just how much their perception of me had changed. Esther, I want to ask your advice about something that's been bothering me at work, she said during one of our Wednesday evening sessions. There's a situation with a colleague that I'm not sure how to handle, and I keep thinking about what you said about maintaining your dignity while addressing problems directly. The request for advice was unprecedented. Rebecca had never sought my guidance on any significant matter, personal or professional. Her acknowledgement that my approach to conflict resolution might have relevance to her own challenges suggested a fundamental shift in how she viewed my wisdom and experience. Tell me about the situation, I said, feeling genuinely honored that she would trust me with something important to her. Rebecca described a workplace conflict involving a colleague who was taking credit for her ideas while undermining her authority with their shared supervisor. The situation was creating stress that was affecting her performance and job satisfaction, but she was afraid that addressing it directly might be perceived as petty or unprofessional. What would you do in my position? Rebecca asked. I would document everything carefully, then address it systematically, I replied. First with the colleague directly, making it clear that the behavior is unacceptable. If that doesn't work, then with the supervisor, using specific examples rather than general complaints. But what if it backfires? What if I'm seen as difficult or unable to work well with others? Rebecca, protecting yourself from people who are actively harming your interests isn't being difficult. It's being professional. The real question is whether you value your own success enough to advocate for it, even when that advocacy is uncomfortable. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Rebecca asking detailed questions about how to prepare for difficult conversations, how to remain calm under pressure, and how to maintain professional relationships while establishing firm boundaries. By the end, she had a clear plan for addressing her workplace problem and a new appreciation for the skills I'd developed through decades of navigating challenging situations. 2 weeks later, Rebecca called to tell me that her approach had been successful. The colleague's behavior had stopped immediately after their direct conversation, and their supervisor had thanked Rebecca for bringing the issue to her attention professionally, rather than letting it fester into a larger problem. "I never would have handled it that way before our conversation," Rebecca said. "I would have either suffered in silence or escalated it dramatically. You taught me there was a middle path that protected my interests while maintaining my professional relationships." These kinds of exchanges became increasingly common as our relationship deepened. Jason began consulting me about financial decisions that affected the family. Not because he needed my money, but because he valued my perspective on long-term planning and risk assessment. The children started calling me when they had questions about school projects or friend problems, treating me as a genuine resource rather than just another adult they were required to respect. 3 months into our new arrangement, I realized that the financial leverage that had initiated these changes was becoming less relevant to maintaining them. Jason and Rebecca were treating me better not because they feared losing my support, but because they discovered that having a genuine relationship with me actually enriched their lives. The test of this theory came when Jason brought up the subject of our financial arrangements during one of our Saturday morning breakfasts. "Mom, I've been thinking about the money situation, and I want to discuss something with you." My heart rate increased slightly, wondering if he was about to request early reinstatement of full support or attempt to renegotiate the terms I'd established. "I want you to know that even if you decided to end all financial support immediately, Rebecca and I are committed to maintaining the relationship we've built over these past few months. We've discovered that having you genuinely involved in our lives is more valuable than any monetary assistance you might provide." The statement was exactly what I'd hoped to hear, but I needed to be certain it was sincere rather than strategic. "Jason, that's wonderful to hear, but I want you to think carefully about what that would actually mean. Your mortgage would increase significantly without the supplemental payments. Rebecca's business account wouldn't have the same cushion for unexpected expenses. The children's activities and education fund wouldn't have the same level of support. We've actually been working on adjusting our budget to account for those changes," Jason replied. "Not because we expect you to withdraw support, but because we want to make sure our relationship with you isn't dependent on financial arrangements." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "We've realized that the money made our lives easier, but the relationship makes our lives better. If we had to choose, we'd choose the relationship." This conversation marked a turning point in our family dynamics. The financial arrangements remained in place, but they were no longer the primary factor determining how we treated each other. Instead, they'd become what they should have been all along, one way that I could support my family's success while maintaining my own dignity and autonomy. 4 months into our new relationship, an unexpected crisis tested the genuine nature of the changes we'd all made. I fell in my apartment on a Tuesday evening, not seriously injuring myself but badly spraining my ankle and bruising my ribs. The fall itself was frightening, but what happened afterward revealed just how completely our family dynamics had transformed. I managed to call Jason from where I'd fallen, and he answered immediately despite the late hour. Without hesitation, he and Rebecca both came to my apartment, assessed the situation, and insisted on taking me to the emergency room for evaluation. What followed was 12 hours of the kind of care and attention that I'd longed for but never expected to receive. Rebecca stayed with me throughout the entire emergency room visit, handling insurance paperwork, communicating with medical staff, and ensuring that I understood all the instructions for home care. Jason arranged for time off work to help me with daily activities while my ankle healed, and both of them worked together to modify my apartment temporarily for easier mobility. Most remarkably, they included Emma and Tyler in my care in age-appropriate ways. The children made get-well cards, helped prepare meals I could manage with limited mobility, and spent time reading to me when I was resting. Instead of shielding them from their grandmother's temporary vulnerability, Jason and Rebecca used the situation as an opportunity to teach them about caring for family members and contributing to each other's well-being. "Grandma, are you going to be okay?" Emma asked during one of her visits, her concern genuine and touching. "I'm going to be fine, sweetheart. Sometimes older people need extra help when they're hurt, just like you needed extra help when you were little. We can take care of you like you took care of Daddy when he was little." Tyler announced with the matter-of-fact confidence of childhood. The 3 weeks of my recovery became some of the most connected and meaningful time I'd spent with my family in years. Not because I enjoyed being dependent on them, but because their response to my temporary need demonstrated that our new relationship was strong enough to handle genuine interdependence rather than just pleasant social interaction. When I was fully recovered and our routine returned to normal, I knew that the changes in our family were permanent. Jason and Rebecca had proven that their new treatment of me wasn't conditional on my continued financial support or even my continued independence. They'd chosen to see me as a valuable family member whose well-being mattered to them personally, not just as an obligation to be managed. The woman who had stood at that bus stop in freezing rain, feeling abandoned and forgotten by her own son, was gone forever. In her place was someone who had learned to advocate for herself effectively, to establish boundaries that protected her dignity, and to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. As I approached the 6-month mark that would determine whether my financial support continued permanently, I realized that the ultimatum had achieved something far more important than compliance with my demands. It had created space for authentic relationships to develop between people who had been going through the motions of family connection without experiencing its genuine benefits. The money had been the catalyst, but love and respect had become the foundation. And that foundation was strong enough to support whatever challenges and changes the future might bring to our family. The 6-month deadline I had established was approaching rapidly, and with it came an unexpected dilemma. The changes in Jason and Rebecca's behavior had exceeded my most optimistic expectations. But I found myself questioning whether my ultimatum had created genuine transformation or simply sophisticated compliance. The distinction mattered more than I had initially realized, because my decision would affect not just our financial arrangements, but the entire foundation of trust we were attempting to rebuild. During a quiet evening in my apartment, I spread out the journal I had been keeping throughout this period, documenting every interaction, every gesture, every sign of progress or backsliding. The pages told a story of gradual but consistent change, yet I remained haunted by Patricia's warning about the difference between temporary accommodation and permanent growth. My contemplation was interrupted by an unexpected phone call from Emma. At 10 years old, she rarely called me independently, usually communicating through her parents or during our scheduled family time. Her voice carried an excitement that immediately captured my attention. "Grandma Esther, I have something really important to ask you, and Mom said I should call you myself because it's my decision to make." The fact that Rebecca had encouraged Emma to contact me directly about something important represented a fundamental shift from their previous approach of managing all interactions between the grandchildren and me. "What's on your mind, sweetheart? My school is having a Grandparents' Day next Friday, and I want you to come be my special guest. But it's not just sitting in the auditorium listening to us sing. They want the grandparents to talk about their lives and teach us something special. Will you come and share stories about our family?" The invitation was both thrilling and terrifying. Emma was asking me to be a central part of her school experience, to represent our family's history to her classmates and teachers. More significantly, she was specifically requesting that I share our stories, indicating that she valued my perspective and wanted others to hear it. "I would be honored to come, Emma. What kind of stories would you like me to tell?" "I want you to tell them about how you and Grandpa came to America and built your life here. And maybe about how you raised Daddy and helped him become successful. And about how you're helping our family now, even though some people might think grandmas are just supposed to sit around and be quiet." The sophistication of Emma's request astounded me. At 10 years old, she had somehow grasped that my role in the family extended beyond traditional grandmotherly functions, and she wanted to celebrate that complexity rather than hide it. "Emma, how did you learn about my helping the family?" "That's not something we've discussed during our time together. I heard Mom and Dad talking about it one night when they thought I was asleep. They weren't complaining or anything. They were talking about how smart and generous you are, and how they wish they had appreciated you better before. Mom said you were like a guardian angel who was watching over us without us even knowing it." The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Emma asking detailed questions about my childhood, my marriage to her grandfather, and my experiences as a young mother. Her curiosity was genuine and thoughtful, demonstrating that she saw me as a complex person with an interesting history rather than just the elderly woman who attended family functions. After hanging up with Emma, I called Rebecca to confirm the details of Grandparents' Day and to discuss what would be appropriate to share with a classroom of 10-year-olds. Esther, I hope you don't mind that Emma called you directly, Rebecca said. She's been talking about this presentation for weeks, and when I suggested she ask you to participate, she insisted on making the invitation herself. I don't mind at all. In fact, I'm touched that she wanted to handle it personally. But I want to make sure I don't say anything that would embarrass her or create problems. Actually, that's something I wanted to talk to you about. Jason and I have been discussing how much to tell the children about our family's financial arrangements, and we've decided that age-appropriate honesty is better than secretive protection. This was a significant development. Most families would try to shield young children from knowledge about money matters, especially complex arrangements involving multiple generations. Rebecca's willingness to be transparent suggested a level of comfort with our situation that went beyond mere acceptance. Emma and Tyler both know that you help support our family in important ways, Rebecca continued. We've explained it as grandparents sometimes sharing their resources to help their children and grandchildren have better opportunities. They understand that this is something special and generous, not something to take for granted. How did they react to that information? Emma asked if that meant you were like a fairy godmother, which made us all laugh. Tyler wanted to know if he should write you thank you notes for things like his soccer equipment and piano lessons. They both seemed to feel more connected to you, knowing that you're actively invested in their well-being. The conversation revealed another layer of the transformation that had occurred in our family dynamics. Instead of protecting their children from the complexities of adult relationships, Jason and Rebecca were using our situation as an opportunity to teach important lessons about gratitude, generosity, and family responsibility. Grandparents' Day arrived with October sunshine that seemed to bless the occasion. I dressed carefully in a burgundy blazer that projected competence while remaining approachable, and I brought photo albums and small artifacts that could help illustrate my stories for the children. Emma's classroom was decorated with student artwork depicting their families, and I was moved to see that her contribution included a detailed drawing of me standing next to her and Tyler, with the caption, "My Grandma Esther teaches me important things." The image showed me not as a frail elderly figure but as an active participant in her life. When it was time for my presentation, Emma introduced me with a confidence that made my heart swell with pride. This is my Grandma Esther. She came to America when she was young and built a successful life with my grandpa. She raised my dad to be a good person, and now she helps take care of our whole family. She's really smart and knows how to solve problems. For the next 40 minutes, I shared carefully chosen stories about immigration, family building, and the importance of education and hard work. I talked about my early years working in a factory while learning English at night school, about meeting their grandfather at a community dance, about the challenges and rewards of raising children while building a stable life. The children asked thoughtful questions about historical events, cultural differences, and family traditions. But the most meaningful moment came when a boy named Michael asked, "Mrs. Rivera, what's the most important thing you want your grandchildren to learn from you?" I want them to learn that family members take care of each other, even when it's difficult or inconvenient. I want them to understand that everyone in a family has something valuable to contribute, regardless of their age or circumstances. And I want them to know that real love shows up through actions, not just words. Emma beamed throughout my presentation, clearly proud to have me representing her family. But more importantly, I could see that she genuinely understood and valued the messages I was sharing. She wasn't just being polite to her grandmother. She was absorbing lessons about family responsibility and personal strength that would shape her own character development. After the formal presentation, several other grandparents approached me to express admiration for my story and to share their own experiences of family challenges and triumphs. One woman, Mrs. Chen, made a comment that particularly resonated with me. It's refreshing to hear someone talk honestly about family relationships requiring work and intention. Too many people pretend that love automatically translates into good treatment. But you're clearly someone who understands that respect has to be earned and maintained by everyone involved. The drive home with Emma, Tyler, and Rebecca provided an opportunity for the children to process what they had learned and to ask additional questions in a more private setting. "Grandma, Were you scared when you first came to America? Tyler asked from the back seat. I was nervous about many things, but I was also excited about the possibilities. Sometimes the best opportunities come with uncertainty and challenge. Is that why you help our family now? Because you want us to have good opportunities too? Emma added. That's part of it, sweetheart. But mostly I help because I love you, and I want to be involved in your lives in meaningful ways. When families support each other, everyone benefits. Rebecca glanced at me from the driver's seat with an expression of gratitude and respect that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. Our relationship had evolved to the point where she genuinely valued my involvement with her children and trusted my influence on their development. That evening, Jason called to thank me for participating in Grandparents' Day and to share some feedback he had received from Emma's teacher. Mrs. Patterson called to tell me how impressed she was with your presentation, Jason said. She said it was one of the most thoughtful and engaging talks they've had from a family member. Emma has been glowing about it all afternoon. It was my pleasure, Jason. Emma asked wonderful questions and seemed genuinely interested in learning about our family history. Mom, that's something I want to talk to you about. Rebecca and I have been realizing that we've never really shared family stories with the kids in any systematic way. We know bits and pieces about your and Dad's backgrounds, but we've never organized that information or made it accessible to Emma and Tyler. This observation led to an extended conversation about family heritage and the importance of children understanding their roots. Jason proposed creating a family history project that would document stories, photographs, and important milestones for future generations. Would you be willing to help us put together something more comprehensive? Jason asked. Not just the basic facts, but the real stories about challenges you and Dad faced, lessons you learned, traditions that were important to you. The request represented another evolution in how Jason viewed my role in the family. Instead of seeing me as someone whose past was irrelevant to their present lives, he was recognizing that my experiences contained wisdom and perspective that could benefit his children's understanding of themselves and their heritage. Over the following weeks, our family history project became a focal point for deeper connections between all of us. Emma and Tyler interviewed me extensively about my childhood, my courtship with their grandfather, my experiences as a young mother, and my perspectives on the changes I had witnessed over decades of American life. These conversations revealed aspects of my personality and experience that even Jason had never fully understood. He learned about challenges his father and I had faced early in our marriage, about financial struggles we had overcome through careful planning and mutual support, about dreams we had pursued, and others we had adapted when circumstances changed. Mom, I never knew you wanted to be a teacher when you were young, Jason said during one of our recording sessions. Why didn't you pursue that dream? When your father and I got married, I had to choose between continuing my education and helping support our household while he established his business. I chose to prioritize our family's immediate needs, but I never stopped learning or sharing knowledge with others. Is that why you volunteer at the library and why you enjoy helping Emma and Tyler with their schoolwork? Partly, yes. I found ways to use my love of learning and teaching, even though my career path changed. That's something I hope Emma and Tyler will remember if their own dreams need to be adjusted as they grow up. These discussions were illuminating for Rebecca as well, who began to understand that many of my suggestions about child rearing and family management came from decades of experience navigating similar challenges. Esther, when you mentioned that Emma might benefit from more structure in her homework routine, I initially thought you were criticizing my parenting, Rebecca admitted during one of our conversations. Now I realize you were sharing a strategy that worked when you were raising Jason in similar circumstances. Rebecca, I never intended to criticize your choices. I was trying to offer support based on what I had learned from experience. But I understand why my suggestions might have felt intrusive if you didn't know the context behind them. Our family history project also created opportunities for Jason and Rebecca to share their own stories and perspectives with Emma and Tyler, creating a more complete picture of how our family had evolved over time. The children learned about their parents' courtship, their career decisions, their hopes for the future, and their own experiences of becoming parents. As November arrived, bringing us closer to my 6-month deadline, I found myself facing an unexpected emotional complexity. The changes in our family relationships had become so natural and beneficial that the artificial timeline I had established felt increasingly irrelevant. Yet I remained committed to following through on the boundaries I had set, both to maintain my own integrity and to ensure that the improvements in our relationships were sustainable. The resolution came through an initiative from Jason and Rebecca that I had not anticipated. They requested a family meeting to discuss our financial arrangements, but not to negotiate for early reinstatement of support. Instead, they wanted to propose a completely different structure that would address the underlying issues that had led to our original conflict. "Mom, we've been thinking about the money situation from a different angle," Jason began, when we gathered in my living room on a Sunday afternoon. "Instead of you providing hidden support that we receive passively, we want to explore ways that we can work together more transparently to achieve shared family goals." Rebecca nodded in agreement. "We've realized that the secrecy around your financial help created problems for everyone. You didn't receive appropriate gratitude or recognition for your generosity, and we didn't have opportunities to contribute to family decisions or express our preferences about how resources were used." They presented a comprehensive proposal that restructured our financial relationships around collaboration rather than one-sided giving. Instead of me quietly paying for various expenses, we would create joint accounts for specific purposes like the children's education, family vacations, emergency funds, and household improvements. All contributions would be transparent, with decisions made collectively based on our respective abilities and priorities. The goal is to create a system where everyone contributes according to their capabilities, and everyone benefits according to their needs, Jason explained. "You have more financial resources, but we have more physical energy and time. Instead of you carrying the financial burden alone, we can share responsibilities in ways that honor everyone's contributions." The proposal included specific examples of how this collaboration might work. Emma's piano lessons and Tyler's soccer fees would be funded through a joint activities account where I contributed based on my financial capacity, while Jason and Rebecca contributed through transportation, supervision, and advocacy with coaches and teachers. Family vacations would be planned collectively, with costs shared proportionally, but decisions made through genuine consultation, rather than one person bearing all expenses and others accepting benefits passively. "Most importantly," Rebecca added, "we want to establish regular family financial meetings, where we discuss goals, assess progress, and make adjustments based on changing circumstances. No more secrets, no more assumptions, no more taking anything for granted." The proposal addressed every concern I had raised about transparency, respect, and mutual responsibility. It created structures for ongoing communication while protecting everyone's autonomy and dignity. Most significantly, it demonstrated that Jason and Rebecca had internalized the lessons about reciprocity and appreciation that our 6-month process had been designed to teach. "There's one more thing," Jason said, reaching into his briefcase to pull out an official-looking document. "We want you to know that regardless of any financial arrangements, we've updated our estate planning to name you as Emma and Tyler's guardian, if anything should happen to both of us. We've also established a trust that ensures you'll be cared for if you ever need assistance as you age." The legal documents represented a level of commitment to our family relationship that went far beyond financial convenience. Jason and Rebecca were formally acknowledging my importance in their children's lives and their own responsibility for my well-being. They were choosing to intertwine our futures in ways that reflected genuine love and interdependence, rather than superficial obligation. "We know this is different from what you originally proposed," Rebecca said, "but we hope it addresses the underlying issues that led to your ultimatum in a more sustainable way." I studied the proposal carefully, asking questions about implementation, decision-making processes, and contingency plans. The more we discussed the details, the more impressed I became with the thoughtfulness they had invested in, addressing not just the practical aspects of family financial cooperation, but the emotional and relational dimensions as well. "This is far more comprehensive than anything I had envisioned," I told them honestly. "You've created a framework that could strengthen our family relationships for decades to come." The meeting concluded with our unanimous agreement to implement their proposal immediately, making my original 6-month deadline obsolete. We had achieved something better than compliance with my ultimatum. We had created a new foundation for family interaction that honored everyone's needs and contributions. As Jason and Rebecca prepared to leave, Emma and Tyler burst through the front door with the kind of exuberant energy that only children can sustain. They had been at a neighbor's house during our adult meeting, but their arrival provided a perfect opportunity to share our new arrangements with them in age-appropriate terms. "Grandma Esther, are you going to keep helping us with school and activities and things?" Emma asked with the directness that children excel at. "Yes, sweetheart. But now we're going to work together as a whole family to make decisions about how we help each other. You and Tyler will have voices in those decisions too." "Does that mean we can ask for things we really want, like that science camp Tyler keeps talking about?" Tyler's interest was immediately engaged. "It means we'll discuss everyone's wishes and figure out together how to make good things happen for our family," Rebecca explained. "But it also means everyone will have responsibilities to help make those good things possible." The children accepted these explanations with the adaptability that makes family changes easier, when they're handled honestly and inclusively. They seemed genuinely excited about being included in family planning rather than simply being recipients of adult decisions. That evening, as I reflected on the day's developments, I realized that my confrontation with Jason and Rebecca about their treatment of me had accomplished something far more valuable than I had originally intended. It had forced all of us to examine our assumptions about family relationships and to build something more authentic and sustainable than what we had before. The woman who had stood at that bus stop in freezing rain, feeling abandoned and powerless, had discovered that she possessed both the strength to demand better treatment and the wisdom to help create relationships worthy of that demand. My family had not just returned to treating me well, they had evolved into people capable of genuine partnership and mutual support. More importantly, Emma and Tyler were growing up in a family system that valued every member's contributions and taught them that love requires both generosity and accountability. They were learning lessons about family responsibility and personal dignity that would serve them well throughout their own lives. The financial arrangements had been the catalyst for change, but the real transformation had occurred in our understanding of what family relationships could and should look like. We had moved from a dynamic based on obligation and accommodation to one based on choice and collaboration. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with money or control. I had successfully advocated for myself while helping my family become better versions of themselves. The respect and love I was now receiving felt authentic because it was based on who I actually was, rather than who I had pretended to be in order to maintain peace. The journey from abandonment to empowerment had required courage I hadn't known I possessed, but it had led to relationships that were stronger and more genuine than anything I had experienced since my husband's death. My family was finally treating me like the valuable person I had always been, and I was finally treating myself that way too. 1 year after that December night when I had been abandoned at the bus stop, I found myself standing in the kitchen of Jason and Rebecca's home, not as a visiting guest but as a central participant in preparing Thanksgiving dinner for our extended family. The transformation was so complete that the woman who had once felt invisible in this same space seemed like a character from someone else's story. The morning had begun early, with Tyler arriving at my apartment at 7 o'clock to help transport the traditional Puerto Rican dishes I had prepared for our celebration. At 9 years old, he had become my enthusiastic assistant in preserving family culinary traditions, learning to make pasteles and flan with the same dedication he applied to his soccer practice. "Grandma Esther, do you think Great-Grandpa would be proud that I learned to make his favorite recipes?" Tyler asked as we carefully packed the containers for transport. "I think he would be amazed that his great-grandson cares enough about our heritage to spend his weekends learning traditional cooking," I replied, struck by how naturally Tyler had embraced his role as a keeper of family traditions. The drive to Jason and Rebecca's house provided an opportunity for us to discuss the day's schedule, and Tyler's excitement about presenting our family history project to relatives who would be meeting for the first time in several years. Our collaborative documentation of family stories had grown into a comprehensive collection of photographs, documents, and recorded interviews that Tyler and Emma were eager to share. When we arrived, Emma was already dressed in the traditional Puerto Rican dress I had helped her select for the occasion, her hair adorned with a flower that matched the vibrant colors of the fabric. She greeted us with an embrace that spoke to the genuine affection that had developed between us over the months of working together on various projects. "Grandma, wait until you see how Dad and Mom decorated the dining room," Emma said, taking my hand to lead me through the house. They used your suggestions about incorporating family photographs and traditional colors. The dining room had been transformed into a celebration of our multicultural heritage, with decorations that honored both the American traditions that Jason's generation had adopted and the Puerto Rican customs that I had maintained throughout my life in the mainland United States. The centerpiece featured a combination of autumn leaves and tropical flowers, symbolizing the blending of influences that had shaped our family's identity. Rebecca emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron that I had given her months earlier, one that had belonged to my mother and carried decades of memories from family celebrations. Seeing her use it with obvious pride, rather than polite obligation, represented the depth of change that had occurred in her relationship with our family heritage. "Esther, I started the turkey according to your instructions, but I want you to check the seasoning before we put it in the oven," Rebecca said, consulting the handwritten recipe cards I had shared with her. "I'm still learning the balance of spices that makes your version so special." This request for guidance represented a complete reversal from the early years of our relationship, when Rebecca had insisted on handling all holiday preparations independently, rather than accepting input that might suggest her methods were inadequate. Now she actively sought my expertise while maintaining her own authority in her kitchen, creating a collaborative dynamic that benefited everyone. The morning continued with the arrival of Marcus and his family, who had driven 3 hours to join our celebration. Marcus had become something of a hero to Emma and Tyler after his rescue of me that terrible December night, and they were eager to share their accomplishments and family projects with someone they viewed as both cousin and honorary uncle. "Aunt Esther, this is incredible," Marcus said as he reviewed the family history documentation that Tyler was proudly displaying. "You've created something that will benefit generations of our family. I wish my kids could have this kind of connection to their heritage." His comment prompted an immediate response from Emma, who had developed a strong sense of family inclusiveness over the past year. "Uncle Marcus, we could help you make a project like this for your family too. Grandma Esther knows lots of stories about your mom and their childhood together." The offer was spontaneous and generous, reflecting the values of family support and knowledge sharing that had become central to our household culture. More importantly, it demonstrated that Emma had internalized the importance of preserving family connections, rather than simply benefiting passively from them. As we worked together in the kitchen, preparing side dishes and coordinating cooking times, I was struck by how naturally everyone had assumed complementary roles based on their strengths and interests, rather than traditional hierarchies or obligatory assignments. Jason managed the logistics of timing and coordination, Rebecca handled the more complex main dishes, Tyler assisted with preparation and learned traditional techniques, Emma focused on presentation and decoration, and I provided guidance and historical context for our methods. The collaborative atmosphere extended beyond meal preparation to include ongoing conversations about family decisions and future planning. During quiet moments between cooking tasks, Jason updated me on his progress toward a career advancement that would require additional certification, but offer better long-term prospects for our family's financial stability. "Mom, I wanted to discuss the tuition costs for the program with you before making a final decision," Jason said as we worked together to prepare vegetables for roasting. "Under our new financial arrangement, this would affect the family education fund, so I want to make sure we're all comfortable with the investment." The consultation was both practical and symbolic, representing Jason's commitment to collaborative decision-making rather than unilateral choices that affected our shared resources. More importantly, it demonstrated his recognition that my input was valuable for reasons beyond financial contribution. "Have you researched the employment prospects for graduates of this program?" I asked, drawing on decades of experience in evaluating educational investments for long-term benefit. "I have, but I'd appreciate your perspective on the analysis I've done. You have insights about career development that I want to incorporate into my planning." Our discussion continued throughout the morning, with Rebecca contributing her own professional expertise about industry trends and market conditions. The conversation exemplified the kind of mutual consultation and shared wisdom that had become characteristic of our family's approach to important decisions. As our extended family members arrived for dinner, I found myself in the unfamiliar but deeply satisfying position of being recognized as the matriarch of a thriving multi-generational household. Cousins, in-laws, and family friends sought my perspective on everything from child-rearing challenges to financial planning decisions, treating me as a resource and authority rather than a polite elderly relative to be accommodated. Mrs. Rivera, Jason tells me you've been instrumental in helping them restructure their approach to family finances, said Rebecca's sister Maria, who was facing similar challenges and balancing her own career ambitions with family responsibilities. Would you be willing to share some advice about long-term planning for families with mixed financial situations? The request led to an extended conversation with several family members about strategies for collaborative resource management, educational planning, and retirement preparation. I found myself drawing on knowledge and experience that had been largely ignored for years, offering practical guidance that was genuinely appreciated and implemented. Emma and Tyler served as enthusiastic assistants during these discussions, helping to organize documents and sharing their own understanding of family financial cooperation in terms that made complex concepts accessible to other children present. Their comfort with discussing money matters in age-appropriate ways reflected the transparency and education that had become integral to our household culture. Grandma Esther taught us that families work best when everyone contributes what they can, and everyone benefits from what the family can provide, Emma explained to her cousin Sophia, who was curious about our family's approach to shared decision-making. The afternoon's highlight came when Tyler and Emma presented their family history project to the assembled relatives, using photographs, documents, and recorded interviews to tell the story of our immigration, adaptation, and success in America. Their presentation was polished and engaging, but more importantly, it was infused with genuine pride in our heritage and appreciation for the struggles and achievements of previous generations. This is my great-grandmother Maria, who came to New York from Puerto Rico when she was only 16 years old, Tyler explained, pointing to a faded photograph from the 1940s. She didn't speak English, but she learned by working in a factory during the day and going to school at night. She saved enough money to bring her whole family to the mainland. Emma continued the narrative by describing my own childhood experiences, my courtship with their grandfather, and the challenges we had faced in building a stable life while preserving important cultural traditions. Her account was detailed and accurate, demonstrating that she had truly absorbed the lessons about resilience, adaptation, and family loyalty that our conversations had been designed to teach. The presentation concluded with a discussion of our current family structure and the values that guided our interactions with each other. Emma and Tyler spoke confidently about the importance of mutual support, honest communication, and respect for every family member's contributions, using examples from their own recent experiences to illustrate these principles. Sometimes families have problems that need to be solved by talking honestly about what's not working, Emma said, referencing our family's transformation without revealing inappropriate details about adult conflicts. When that happens, it's important to listen to everyone's concerns and work together to find solutions that make things better for everybody. The presentation was met with enthusiastic applause and numerous questions from relatives who were impressed by the children's knowledge and confidence. Several family members requested copies of our documentation, hoping to create similar projects for their own branches of the extended family. As the afternoon progressed into evening, our Thanksgiving celebration evolved into an impromptu family reunion, with relatives sharing updates about their own lives, challenges, and achievements. The atmosphere was warm and inclusive, with generations mixing naturally and conversations flowing easily between topics of serious importance and lighthearted family humor. During a quiet moment, Marcus approached me with an observation that captured the significance of our family's transformation. "Aunt Esther, watching you with Jason's family today, I can hardly believe this is the same situation I encountered that night I picked you up from the bus stop. You've not only rebuilt your relationship with them, you've created something better than what existed before." His comment prompted reflection on just how dramatically our family dynamics had evolved. The surface politeness and managed interactions of our previous relationships had been replaced by genuine collaboration, mutual respect, and authentic affection. More importantly, everyone had grown through the process of addressing our problems directly, rather than allowing them to fester beneath a veneer of family obligation. Marcus, the crisis forced all of us to examine what we really wanted from our family relationships, and to take responsibility for creating those conditions, I replied. Jason and Rebecca discovered that they actually enjoyed having me involved in their lives when that involvement was based on mutual choice rather than guilt or duty. And you discovered that you didn't have to accept poor treatment in order to maintain family connections. Exactly. I learned that demanding respect didn't damage our relationships. It made them stronger and more honest. As the evening wound down and families began preparing for departure, Jason approached me with a request that symbolized how completely our roles and relationships had evolved. Mom, Rebecca and I have been discussing Christmas planning, and we want to ask if you'd be willing to host Christmas Eve dinner at your apartment this year. We know it's smaller than our house, but we think it would be meaningful for the extended family to experience the traditions and atmosphere that shaped our heritage. The invitation represented a complete reversal of previous holiday arrangements, when I had been included as a guest in celebrations planned and hosted by the younger generation. Now, Jason and Rebecca were actively seeking to center our family gatherings around the traditions and environment that I represented. I would be honored to host Christmas Eve, I replied, genuinely moved by the request. But let's plan it as a collaborative effort, with everyone contributing to the preparation and celebration. That's exactly what we were hoping for, Rebecca added, joining our conversation. We want Emma and Tyler to experience Christmas the way you celebrated it when Jason was their age, but we also want to contribute our own energy and resources to make it special. The discussion that followed involved detailed planning for a celebration that would blend traditional elements with contemporary family dynamics, incorporating the collaborative decision-making and shared responsibility that had become characteristic of our family culture. Emma and Tyler were consulted about their preferences and assigned age-appropriate responsibilities for preparation and hosting duties. As our guests departed and the house was cleaned and restored to order, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought us to this point. The woman who had once felt like an unwelcome burden in her own son's home was now recognized as the cornerstone of a thriving, multi-generational family that other relatives envied and sought to emulate. The financial arrangements that had triggered our transformation had become secondary to the genuine relationships we had built through honest communication and mutual respect. The money still mattered, but it no longer defined the terms of our interactions or determined my value to the family. More importantly, Emma and Tyler were growing up in an environment that taught them to value wisdom and experience, while maintaining their own autonomy and dignity. They were learning to navigate complex family relationships with honesty and compassion, skills that would serve them well throughout their own lives. During the drive back to my apartment, accompanied by Jason, who insisted on ensuring my safe arrival despite the short distance, we discussed the success of our celebration and our excitement about future family gatherings. Mom, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done to rebuild our family relationships, Jason said as we pulled into my apartment complex. Not just the financial support, but the wisdom and patience you showed in helping us become better people. Jason, you and Rebecca did the real work of changing your behavior and priorities. I just provided the motivation and structure for that change to occur. But you also taught us that family relationships require intentional effort and honest communication. Those lessons will benefit Emma and Tyler for the rest of their lives. As I settled into my apartment that evening, surrounded by leftovers from our feast and photographs from our family celebration, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with money or control. I had successfully transformed my family relationships from sources of pain and disappointment into foundations for joy and mutual support. The telephone rang as I was preparing for bed, and Emma's voice brightened the conclusion of an already perfect day. Grandma Esther, I just wanted to say thank you for helping us learn so much about our family today. Uncle Marcus said our presentation was the best part of Thanksgiving, and Cousin Sophia wants to start learning to make pastelis too. It was my pleasure, sweetheart. Sharing our family stories and traditions with people who appreciate them is one of my greatest joys. Grandma, will you teach me to make that coconut flan for Christmas Eve? I want to surprise everyone with something special that I learned from you. The request represented everything that our family transformation had achieved. Emma was choosing to learn traditional skills not out of obligation but from genuine interest and pride in our heritage. She was planning to contribute to our family celebrations through her own efforts and creativity, taking ownership of traditions while making them her own. Of course, Emma. We'll practice several times before Christmas Eve so you feel confident about sharing your creation with the family. After hanging up the phone, I stood by my kitchen window looking out at the city lights that sparkled in the December darkness. 1 year ago, I had been a woman who felt forgotten and discarded by the people she loved most. Tonight, I was the respected matriarch of a family that valued my contributions and sought my guidance on matters both practical and profound. The journey from abandonment to empowerment had required courage I hadn't known I possessed, but it had led to relationships that exceeded my most optimistic expectations. My family was treating me not just with love, but with genuine respect, recognition, and appreciation for everything I brought to their lives. More importantly, I had learned to advocate for myself effectively while helping others grow into better versions of themselves. The skills I had developed in confronting family dysfunction could be applied to any situation where I needed to assert my worth and demand appropriate treatment. The woman who had once stood shivering at a bus stop, feeling powerless and forgotten, had discovered that she possessed both the strength to change difficult circumstances and the wisdom to build something better in their place. My family relationships were now based on choice rather than obligation, collaboration rather than accommodation, and authentic love rather than dutiful tolerance. As I prepared for sleep in my peaceful apartment, I felt grateful not just for the comfort and security that surrounded me, but for the journey that had led to this contentment. The crisis that had seemed so devastating at the time had actually been the catalyst for the most positive transformation of my adult life. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to nurture the relationships we had built and to continue growing as individuals and as a family. Emma's flan lessons, Tyler's interest in family history, Jason's career development, Rebecca's professional challenges. All of these ongoing stories would benefit from the foundation of mutual respect and collaborative support that we had created together. The financial arrangements that had started our transformation remained important, but they had evolved into tools for achieving shared goals rather than weapons for demanding compliance. Our family had learned to talk honestly about money, resources, and responsibility in ways that strengthened rather than strained our relationships. Most significantly, Emma and Tyler were growing up with a clear understanding that family love requires both generosity and accountability, that every member of a family has something valuable to contribute, and that treating people with respect and dignity is more important than maintaining superficial harmony. The legacy I would leave to my grandchildren would not be measured primarily in financial assets, but in the lessons about personal strength, family loyalty, and authentic relationships that I had modeled through my own transformation. They had witnessed their grandmother refuse to accept poor treatment, while simultaneously working to help their family become more loving and supportive. 1 year after the worst night of my widowhood, I had become the woman I was always meant to be. Someone who understood her own worth and insisted that others recognize it too. Someone who could love deeply while maintaining her dignity. Someone who could help others grow without sacrificing her own needs and preferences. The bus stop where I had been abandoned was now just a location I passed occasionally during errands, no longer a symbol of rejection and powerlessness, but a reminder of my own resilience and capacity for positive change. The woman who had shivered there in the freezing rain had discovered that she possessed everything she needed to create the life and relationships she deserved. My story had become one of empowerment rather than victimization, transformation rather than endurance, and authentic love rather than obligatory tolerance. The family that had once treated me as a burden now recognized me as a blessing, and I had learned to see myself the same way. The future stretched ahead with possibilities that excited rather than frightened me. Relationships that energized rather than drained me, and a sense of purpose that extended far beyond simply surviving each day. I had not just rebuilt my family, I had rebuilt myself into someone worthy of the love and respect that now surrounded me in abundance. 2 years had passed since that transformative December night, and I found myself preparing for what would become one of the most meaningful events of my life. Emma's 13th birthday celebration. The milestone was significant not just because it marked her transition into adolescence, but because she had specifically requested that her celebration center around a family heritage ceremony that would formally acknowledge her connection to our Puerto Rican roots and her role as a keeper of family traditions. The idea had emerged during one of our regular cooking sessions 6 months earlier, When Emma had expressed frustration about feeling disconnected from her cultural identity among classmates who seemed more certain about their ethnic backgrounds and family histories. Rather than dismissing her concerns as typical adolescent uncertainty, we had worked together to design a meaningful rite of passage that would address her need for cultural grounding, while celebrating her growth into young womanhood. Grandma Esther, I want people to understand that being Puerto Rican American isn't just about the food we eat or the music we play, Emma had explained during our planning conversations. I want them to see that it's about values and strength and the way we take care of each other. Her sophisticated understanding of cultural identity impressed me, but it also reflected the depth of conversations we had been having over the past 2 years about heritage, adaptation, and the importance of maintaining connections to our roots, while embracing American opportunities. Emma had internalized lessons about cultural pride that I hoped would sustain her through the identity challenges that adolescence would inevitably bring. The preparation for Emma's celebration had become a family project that engaged everyone in researching traditions, preparing special foods, and creating decorations that would transform Jason and Rebecca's backyard into a space that honored our heritage while accommodating contemporary sensibilities. Tyler had enthusiastically embraced his role as Emma's ceremonial escort, learning traditional dances and memorizing family genealogy that he would present during the formal portion of the celebration. Rebecca had surprised everyone with her initiative in coordinating with extended family members across the mainland United States and Puerto Rico, arranging for relatives we hadn't seen in years to participate through video calls, and to send recorded messages of blessing and encouragement for Emma's transition into young adulthood. Her effort to create connections between Emma and family members she had never met demonstrated how completely Rebecca had embraced her role as a bridge between Emma's American present and Puerto Rican heritage. Esther, I want Emma to understand that she's part of something larger than our immediate family, Rebecca had explained as we reviewed the list of relatives who would be participating in the celebration. She needs to see that her strength and intelligence come from generations of women who overcame enormous challenges to create opportunities for their children. The morning of Emma's celebration dawned clear and warm, with September sunshine that seemed to bless our gathering. I arrived early to help with final preparations, carrying the traditional white dress that had been worn by women in our family for coming-of-age ceremonies for 3 generations. The dress had been carefully preserved and slightly altered to fit Emma's growing frame, maintaining its original elegance while accommodating contemporary standards of modesty and comfort. Emma's excitement was palpable as she tried on the dress for the final time, admiring herself in the full-length mirror that Rebecca had positioned in the master bedroom for the occasion. The transformation was remarkable not just because the dress enhanced her natural beauty, but because wearing it seemed to connect her to something larger than herself, giving her a sense of dignity and cultural belonging that I had hoped this ceremony would provide. Grandma, when I put this dress on, I feel like I can hear the voices of all the women who wore it before me, Emma said, smoothing the intricate embroidery that my grandmother had stitched by hand nearly a century earlier. It's like they're telling me that I'm strong enough to handle whatever challenges come next. The ceremony itself began at sunset, with family members gathering in the backyard that had been transformed into an outdoor sanctuary, decorated with traditional colors and symbols. Tyler served as the master of ceremonies, confidently presenting Emma's genealogy and explaining the significance of each element of the celebration to guests who represented multiple generations and various levels of familiarity with Puerto Rican customs. Emma Rodriguez Martinez comes from a long line of strong women who never forgot where they came from, even when they had to travel far from home to find better opportunities, Tyler announced, his voice carrying a maturity that belied his 11 years. Tonight we celebrate her joining that tradition of strength and wisdom. The formal portion of the ceremony included readings from family letters dating back to the 1940s, the presentation of symbolic gifts that represented different aspects of Emma's heritage and aspirations, and the recitation of blessings that had been passed down through generations of our family. Each element had been carefully chosen to connect Emma to her roots, while acknowledging her American identity and future possibilities. Jason's participation in the ceremony was particularly meaningful to me because it demonstrated how completely he had embraced his own role as a guardian of family traditions. He presented Emma with a piece of jewelry that had belonged to my mother, explaining its history and significance with knowledge and reverence that showed he genuinely understood the importance of maintaining connections to our past. Emma, this necklace was worn by your great-great-grandmother during her own coming-of-age ceremony in 1925, Jason said, his voice thick with emotion as he fastened the delicate gold chain around his daughter's neck. She wore it when she got married, when she gave birth to her children, and when she said goodbye to Puerto Rico to start a new life in New York. Now it's yours to wear during the important moments of your own life. The ceremony concluded with Emma's formal acceptance of her role as a keeper of family traditions and her commitment to passing those traditions on to future generations. Her speech was eloquent and heartfelt, reflecting months of preparation and genuine understanding of the responsibilities she was accepting. I promised to honor the sacrifices that my ancestors made so that I could have opportunities they could only dream of, Emma declared, addressing the assembled family with poise that astonished me. I promised to remember that being strong doesn't mean forgetting where you came from, and that success means lifting up your family and community, not just yourself. The celebration that followed the formal ceremony was a joyful blend of traditional Puerto Rican music and contemporary elements that reflected Emma's generation and interests. Extended family members shared stories about their own coming-of-age experiences, offering advice and encouragement that created a network of support extending far beyond our immediate household. The evening's highlight came when Emma asked me to dance with her to a traditional bolero that had been popular during my own youth. As we moved slowly around the makeshift dance floor that Jason had created in their backyard, I was overwhelmed by the realization that this confident, culturally grounded young woman was the same granddaughter who had once been kept at polite distance from my life and heritage. Grandma Esther, thank you for helping me understand who I am and where I come from, Emma whispered as we danced. I know that before you made Dad and Mom change how they treated you, I never would have learned about any of this. Her acknowledgement of our family's transformation was both gratifying and sobering. Emma was old enough to remember the period when our relationships had been superficial and distant, and she understood that her current sense of cultural identity and family connection was the direct result of my refusal to accept poor treatment from her parents. Emma, the most important thing you can learn from our family's experience is that you should never accept being treated with less respect than you deserve, I replied, continuing our slow dance while imparting what I hoped would be a crucial life lesson. Sometimes the people who love you need to be reminded of how to show that love appropriately. As the evening progressed and guests began to depart, I found myself in conversation with several relatives who expressed amazement at the transformation they had witnessed in our family dynamics over the past 2 years. Cousins who had previously viewed our family gatherings as dutiful obligations now spoke enthusiastically about the warmth and authenticity that characterized our interactions. Esther, whatever you did to bring this family together, it's been remarkable to watch, said my nephew Carlos, who had flown in from Chicago specifically for Emma's celebration. Jason and Rebecca treat you like the treasure you've always been. And those children have a connection to their heritage that's going to serve them well throughout their lives. The conversation that followed involved detailed discussion about how other family members might address their own relationship challenges using strategies similar to those I had employed. Several relatives requested copies of our family financial collaboration agreements, hoping to adapt our transparent resource-sharing model to their own situations. The key was refusing to accept poor treatment while simultaneously working to help everyone become better versions of themselves. I explained to a group of cousins who were dealing with their own family tensions. You can't just demand respect. You have to create conditions where respectful treatment becomes more natural and beneficial than disrespectful treatment. These conversations continued long into the evening, with family members sharing their own experiences of relationship challenges and seeking advice about boundary setting, honest communication, and collaborative problem solving. I found myself in the unexpected role of family counselor, drawing on my experience to help others navigate complex dynamics that had previously seemed insurmountable. The weekend following Emma's celebration brought an unexpected invitation that would test how completely our family relationships had evolved. Rebecca's parents, who lived in Arizona and whom I had met only briefly during Jason and Rebecca's wedding 12 years earlier, were planning a visit to evaluate Rebecca's well-being following her father's recent retirement and her mother's minor health concerns. Esther, I want to ask you something that might seem unusual, Rebecca said during one of our regular coffee meetings at my apartment. My parents are coming to visit next month, and I'd like them to stay here in the city for a week so they can really get to know Emma and Tyler. But I also want them to understand how important you are to our family, and how much our lives have improved since we started treating you with the respect you deserve. The request was both touching and slightly concerning. Rebecca wanted her parents to recognize my central role in their family's happiness, but I was uncertain about how visitors from a different generation and cultural background might respond to our unconventional financial arrangements and collaborative decision-making processes. What specifically are you hoping they'll understand about our relationship? I asked, wanting to ensure that I could represent our family dynamics accurately without creating confusion or judgment. I want them to see that you're not just Jason's mother, who we include out of obligation, but an active partner in our family's success and happiness. I want them to understand that the children's confidence and cultural knowledge come from your involvement in their lives, and that our financial stability has been enhanced by your wisdom and generosity. The visit from Rebecca's parents provided an opportunity for our family to demonstrate the authenticity and sustainability of the changes we had made over the past 2 years. Rather than reverting to superficial politeness or managing interactions to avoid complexity, we maintained our normal patterns of transparent communication and collaborative decision-making. Rebecca's mother, Patricia, was initially surprised by the extent of my involvement in family planning and decision-making, but she quickly recognized the benefits that our arrangement provided for everyone involved. During a private conversation over morning coffee, she expressed admiration for the balance we had achieved between respecting generational boundaries and honoring everyone's contributions. Esther, I can see why Rebecca speaks about you with such affection and respect, Patricia said as we sat in my apartment looking through photo albums from Emma's heritage celebration. You've created something special with this family, and it shows in how confident and grounded those children are. Rebecca's father, Robert, was particularly impressed by our family financial collaboration and requested detailed information about how we had structured our arrangements to maintain everyone's autonomy while achieving shared goals. As a recently retired financial planner, he understood the complexity of managing multi-generational resources and appreciated the innovative approaches we had developed. What you've accomplished here could be a model for other families struggling with similar challenges, Robert observed during a family dinner, where we discussed our decision-making processes openly. You've proven that financial transparency and collaborative planning can strengthen family relationships rather than complicating them. The week-long visit concluded with Rebecca's parents expressing genuine enthusiasm for our family dynamics and requesting to be included in future celebrations and gatherings. Their endorsement of our unconventional arrangements provided external validation that what we had built together was not just functional but exemplary. More importantly, their visit demonstrated that our family's transformation had become so natural and sustainable that we could maintain our authentic patterns of interaction, even under the scrutiny of relatives who might have been expected to prefer more traditional approaches to family relationships. As autumn progressed into winter, our family faced a new challenge that would test the depth of our relationships and the strength of our collaborative systems. Jason was offered a promotion that would require relocation to another city, providing significant career advancement and financial benefits, but potentially disrupting the family connections we had worked so hard to build. The decision-making process that followed exemplified everything positive about our family's evolution. Rather than Jason and Rebecca making a unilateral choice and then informing the rest of us about their plans, they initiated a series of family meetings where everyone's concerns and preferences were considered equally. We want everyone to understand that this decision affects our whole family, not just our immediate household, Jason explained during our first discussion about the potential relocation. Before we make any commitments, we need to explore how we can maintain our relationships and honor our responsibilities to each other regardless of geographical distance. Emma and Tyler were included in these conversations in age-appropriate ways, with their educational needs, social connections, and emotional preferences given serious consideration alongside the adult's career and financial priorities. Their input was genuine rather than token, and their concerns were addressed with concrete solutions rather than vague reassurances. If we move, will we still be able to spend time with Grandma Esther and learn about our family traditions? Emma asked during one of our planning sessions. That's one of the most important factors we're considering, Rebecca replied honestly. We're not willing to accept this opportunity if it means losing the relationships and cultural connections that have become so important to all of us. The exploration of alternatives led to creative solutions that none of us had initially considered. Jason's prospective employer was willing to accommodate a modified schedule that would allow him to work remotely part of each month, maintaining strong family connections while advancing his career. Rebecca's consulting business could be operated from anywhere with reliable internet access, providing flexibility that would support frequent travel between cities. Most importantly, we developed a comprehensive plan for maintaining Emma and Tyler's connection to their heritage and extended family regardless of where they lived. This included scheduled visits, ongoing participation in cultural celebrations, continued collaboration on family projects, and the establishment of traditions that could be maintained across distances. What matters most is not whether we live in the same city, but whether we maintain the values and relationships that have made our family strong, I said during one of our planning meetings. If Jason's career advancement will benefit the whole family, we can find ways to preserve what's important while adapting to new circumstances. The decision-making process took several months, during which our family demonstrated remarkable maturity in balancing individual opportunities with collective well-being. Ultimately, Jason accepted the promotion with modifications that would allow him to maintain strong connections to our local family network while advancing his career in ways that would benefit everyone. The resolution of this challenge reinforced my confidence that our family had developed sustainable systems for addressing complex issues through honest communication and collaborative problem-solving. We had proven that geographical distance could not weaken relationships built on genuine respect and mutual commitment. As I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point, I was struck by how completely my life had been transformed by my decision to refuse unacceptable treatment and demand the respect I deserved. The woman who had once felt powerless and forgotten had become the cornerstone of a thriving family that other relatives envied and sought to emulate. My relationship with Jason had evolved from distant obligation to genuine partnership, with regular consultation on important decisions and authentic appreciation for my contributions to the family's success. Rebecca had become not just a daughter-in-law but a true friend who valued my wisdom and actively sought my involvement in her children's development. Most importantly, Emma and Tyler were growing up with a clear understanding of their heritage, strong family values, and the confidence that comes from knowing they are unconditionally loved and supported by multiple generations of relatives who are invested in their success and happiness. The financial arrangements that had initiated our transformation remained important, but had evolved into tools for achieving shared goals rather than weapons for demanding compliance. Our family had learned to discuss money, resources, and responsibility in ways that strengthened rather than strained our relationships. The legacy I would leave to my grandchildren would be measured not primarily in financial assets, but in the lessons about personal strength, family loyalty, and authentic relationships that I had modeled through my own transformation. They had witnessed their grandmother refuse to accept poor treatment while simultaneously working to help their family become more loving and supportive. 3 years after that terrible December night at the bus stop, I had become the woman I was always meant to be, someone who understood her own worth and insisted that others recognize it too, someone who could love deeply while maintaining her dignity, someone who could help others grow without sacrificing her own needs and preferences. The bus stop, where I had been abandoned, was now just a location I passed occasionally during errands, no longer a symbol of rejection and powerlessness, but a reminder of my own resilience and capacity for positive change. The woman who had shivered there in the freezing rain had discovered that she possessed everything she needed to create the life and relationships she deserved. My story had become one of empowerment rather than victimization, transformation rather than endurance, and authentic love rather than obligatory tolerance. The family that had once treated me as a burden now recognized me as a blessing, and I had learned to see myself the same way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.